everyone, it's Professor Kettler. We are in Module 3, and we are going to go over your activity that you're going to be doing for that module. So when you enter Module 3, make sure that you look at all of your resources first, because there are some important readings and videos that can help you with your not only your discussion questions this week, but also your assignment. So we're going to go ahead and go to the assignment. This is where you're going to be finalizing your scientific question and also talking about objectivity and biases. So when you click on the activity guidelines, as usual, they give you an overview and a prompt. The main purpose of this activity is to revise your question to where you have a finalized scientific research question that's based on the main idea of your story. And then you're going to also talk about how beliefs, assumptions, and values may impact a research question. I would recommend maybe about a paragraph for that information. And then, of course, your question is just going to be your main question. So let's go ahead and look at the template. It's really important that you use this template because it has some interesting examples on it that we're going to go over. So when you are completing this, the main thing to remember is that I gave you feedback about your questions in Module 2. And now we're going to just kind of finalize it. And so in this example, they are trying to, the course designers who designed this activity are trying to give you some guidance on completing this activity. And so they've given you the main idea of the story, and they're saying, you know, the types of bacteria that live in the gut of people with chronic fatigue syndrome are different than the bacteria from people who don't have the disease. And so then, you know, this is their possible research questions that they came up with. So in Module 2, you came up with 2 questions. And then you're going to, out of those questions, you're going to pick a finalized question. However, you need to remember that this week's and module's theme is about objectivity and trying to eliminate bias in the research methods and the questioning and, you know, trying to remain objective and also not have any assumptions. So when you look at these research questions, you have to think about, is there any bias? Is there any assumptions in the questions? And if there is, then they need to be either rewritten or they need to be discounted. I would personally not choose this as my finalized research question because I see some biases, potential biases and assumptions in this question because they're looking at, number one, it's just a yes or no question. It's not exactly measurable like we talked about last week. Better, I think the other 2 questions are better because there isn't a bias here. It's just saying, what is the relationship between gut bacteria and chronic fatigue syndrome? So that leaves it open to be anything. Perhaps the gut bacteria, you know, it's a specific gut bacteria that can cause chronic fatigue syndrome. Perhaps they find out that there isn't a relationship. Maybe the people who have chronic fatigue syndrome don't have the same amount of bacteria or they have less, or, you know, maybe it's not statistically significant as far as, you know, calculating the type or the amount. So this one, I feel like 2 and 3 leave it much more open-ended and room for interpretation. Whereas this particular question, do abnormal gut bacteria cause chronic fatigue syndrome, is I understand what the course designers were doing. They're trying to make it concise. However, I feel like it's biased because it's already assuming that the gut bacteria is abnormal. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to make assumptions when we are conducting research and coming up with our research questions. So in week 2, I gave you some examples in the class announcement of testable questions, and it's mainly versed on how does changing one variable affect another. So for instance, we could alter these to say, You know, how does increased inflammation cause or potentially cause an increase in chronic fatigue syndrome? But even then, you could make an argument for that having an assumption to it. So you're just trying to be really careful and very methodical about how you are narrowing your question down. So you're going to need to put a lot of thought into it. And that's why I said you really want to review the resources that are in the module to help you with that. Now, in the second part of this says explain how your beliefs, assumptions, and values may have impacted your research question. So, for instance, if you really, really are on fire for volcanoes, you may have made the assumption that, maybe you've only ever been around the volcano in Hawaii and you've made the assumption that they are not dangerous or explosive, or vice versa. Maybe you've only encountered explosive volcanoes. So that could be something that impacts your research question. There are a lot of times with medications and in the medical field, doctors and scientists have a certain belief system about how medication should work, or how people should take them. So if they're coming at it from that lens, it can impact how they devise their research question. If you are a business person, that, most of the time business people are focused on what's best for the business and not necessarily what is always best for the environment or what's best for the every customer. Like they're just servicing one part of an industry, so that could impact how they decide to do research. It's hard. It's really hard to avoid it. So, and you also have to look at your personal life too. Like I know somebody who was severely impacted by antidepressants, and so they went on a crusade against antidepressants and said it didn't matter that there was, all these people who had benefited from it. They had been harmed by it, so therefore it should all be banned. And so there's nothing wrong with having belief systems, and there's nothing wrong with having values. You just have to be careful to make sure that when scientific research is done and when we are analyzing data, that we are not letting our personal beliefs kind of cloud our judgment on what that data says. Okay, so if you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to help you, and let me know if you need anything, and I will see you all later.